welcome to another episode of Lead with Less. I'm your host, Tash Peterson, Certified People Leadership Coach, and we have an amazing guest today. And I'm so excited for this conversation with Hannah Hardy-Jones, all about navigating mental health. Hannah is someone that I've been following for a long time, and I really love how open and honest she is about her mental health journey. And I know that this episode is going to be really helpful and supportive for people leaders who might find it challenging to navigate and knowing how to support and navigate the mental health of their employees or maybe even themselves. So before we jump into the conversation, I'm going to do a brief introduction and then we're going to head in. Hannah is the co-founder of Contented, an AI startup that turns talk into extraordinary outcomes, capturing meaning in conversations and creating meaningful outputs. Underpinning all of her work is the philosophy that AI is only effective when it is co-created and built with human design and input, and a deep understanding of the problem it is solving. She previously founded the KITE program, a mental health tech company, and has used her background in HR and psychology within her work, as well as her lived experience of postpartum bipolar, which is what the majority of what we discuss in this episode is all about. So I'm really excited for you to listen to this really raw and vulnerable episode and hopefully find some connections and some strategies to help support maybe your own mental health journey or of those within your team or those around you. So let's jump on into the conversation. Hello, Hannah. Thank you so much for being a guest on Lead with Less. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, and just thank you for giving me your time and your energy.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really excited for us to chat.
Hannah, I followed your journey for a long time. I've been following you on LinkedIn, and I followed you since you've had KITE program, and now you've gone into a completely different space around AI, and I'm sure that we might talk a bit about that. But when you founded the KITE program, you shared so openly and courageously about your journey with mental health, your personal challenges with it, and in particular being diagnosed with postpartum bipolar after the birth of your child. So I'd really love for you to just share a bit more about that experience, navigating that in terms of work, motherhood, and what led you to, I guess, getting into this work of being an advocate for mental health.
Yeah, so I mean, and we can talk more about the journey and the diagnosis and everything later on, perhaps. But from the perspective of me feeling comfortable with sharing my journey, it took many years. So it wasn't something that was immediate. You know, we'd been through this really traumatic time. I always say we because it was me and it was my husband and it was my wider family. Like, I don't ever see what I went through as just being my own journey. And so going through anything traumatic, there was such a period of healing that needed to happen. And also, I had to be really respectful of my husband, particularly. And so I think it got to sort of quite a few years, and it was actually the birth of my second child, Henry. So there's nearly 4 years gap between Alice and Henry. And I had never thought that we would be able to have another baby because of what we'd been through. And it was only with the support of the health system and, you know, some really amazing doctors that we were able to do that. And that healed me so much, having a baby and not going through this trauma and being able to stay really mentally well and the confidence that that came with. And so it coincided with, you know, I had a year off and I decided to start KITE. And that was really when I became sort of able to share my story. So they were very, very tied. And I did that at a time when I felt that I couldn't launch KITE and be sort of transparent and authentic with these mums that I wanted to help without saying what I had been through. So that was kind of I guess, the context of that sharing.
I really love what you said in particular. Well, there's two things that I really loved just in that small bit was acknowledging that that trauma, that hardship wasn't only you. And I think sometimes we can get caught up that it is only us. Following the birth of my child, I'm pretty sure I had some postpartum depression for sure. Hey, we had a really traumatic year as well. And you can very quickly think that it's only you, but it's almost like those tendrils and it just seeps and leaches into the rest of your life, doesn't it? And there is an impact on other people. So really love that you pointed that out. And secondly, I really loved what you said around having a sense of healing before stepping into that advocacy, that sharing, that transparency, because again, sometimes, and I see this a lot, sometimes we share too quickly in the hope that it will help, but we're really sharing from such a open wound place
rather than from a scarred place where there's been healing, the wound's scarred over, there's learning, there's perspective, there's shifts, and then being able to use that as a learning rather than just, and neither is wrong. Like, I don't want to say that we should only ever wait, but I
Yeah.
think from a place of openly sharing, like really laying it out to the public, that there needs to be a sense of healing, right? So that there is more self-protection. Would that be accurate to say?
Absolutely. Unwell, and when I was struggling, I was desperate to find someone who was well and thriving, who was talking about their experience, and I couldn't find anyone. And all I could find were kind of people who were using social media or, writing blogs, but from a place of still feeling really unwell
Mhm.
and really struggling. And you can feel it, like that energy of reading somebody talking about you going through a mental health crisis while they're sort of still in it is really painful. Whereas if you read about somebody who is thriving or, sort of who's come through that and you're reading their reflections about them being unwell, there's a really different feel to it.
Mhm.
And so I think that's where I felt it was finally appropriate because I was in a position to be able to talk about my journey without there being this pain and rawness to it. So,
Mm.
yeah, I think that there's that difference, and I think a lot of people share their journey to heal, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there's also a consequence of what that can do to other people. Like, it's not always helpful for others to read that.
Yeah, in the social media world, I've learned that it's termed floodlighting, where we floodlight and we throw it all out there in the hope that we get held by that community
Yeah,
versus the people that are, really immediate to you, and them holding you, like not having the responsibility of these people in the ether,
yeah,
trying to hold space for you. Yeah, and it is interesting. It's, reading that in the moment, that wounding, it's almost like reading someone's diary, right? Like, to some point, how healthy is that to
yeah.
be the observer of that versus being in the trenches of that, using that to heal? So you're in the let's just go back a little bit. Like, how did you navigate being in the trenches of that crisis and then navigating that for yourself, with your husband, with your young children, navigating that through?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into the birth, both my husband and I were kind of overconfident. So I had worked in HR all my life, so I definitely was sort of proud of the fact that I could deal with different sort of situations, and I felt I was a good leader, so surely that would mean I'd be an amazing mum. My husband has always been in management roles where he felt in control. And so when we went into that birth, I think we were so blindsided because it never crossed our mind that we would ever, like, fail, how we would say is fail. And so I look back and I think even if we just read a bit more or asked a few more questions at our antenatal class, but we were just like, you know, we're going to be fine. And I'd actually applied for only 3 months parental leave, which just blows my mind looking back at that. But I was like,
Oh,
I'm
with a
going back
young
to
us.
yeah, and it was like the job that I had, there was a daycare, like, next door, so I was like, "This is a sign." So that part, I think, was we were unprepared. Then because of the way that the bipolar manifested was manic first, so extreme high, and so we were looking out for a low, like, it was sort of what everyone
Mm,
talked about. Like, no one had ever, and I studied psychology, like, no one had ever mention that as a woman, that could happen, that you could go the
mm,
complete other end of the spectrum, and so it wasn't picked up for, I mean, I say a long time. It was day 12 that it was really picked up because things had spiraled so much out of control, and so I think we look back on it, and if it had been the depression first, it would have been easier to manage because we would have kinda understood a little bit, but I was high, like, I was shopping, I was roaming around, like, getting my hair done on day 3 after having a baby and,
wow.
like, really quite extreme behaviors. I was acting like a teenager, like, I'd run away, like, if people would say something I didn't like, I'd run down the
Like, your
street.
body hadn't just gone through, like, the
Oh,
most transformational experience ever.
Exactly. It was, there was no pain. So I had a really traumatic birth, which is a big contributing factor to what I went through. And like you would think that I would be recovering for weeks, but even 2 days later, the mania had started and I was sitting cross-legged, and even the doctors were like, what, like, have you taken any pain relief? So this whole experience at the start was, for me personally, if I look back, I can remember it all. And when you're high, you are having the time of your life, really, other than when you have these sort of rage outbursts. Or it felt like like if I look back, it really felt like how I felt as a teenager, like just up and down and, so emotional, and you can't say anything sort of a cross word to me because I'll react. But I was still okay. Whereas my husband and my family were so frightened by this person that I was. And the scariest part was the fact that I had no connection or like need to be around my daughter, like this beautiful baby that I just had. I treated her like just this lovely doll in the corner, like, oh, yeah, people are taking care of her and I've got things to do. So all of that's super traumatic for obviously everyone else around me. And I was treated at home, so they didn't admit me because I wasn't a risk. Well, they didn't deem me to be a risk to anyone. Or
You're just a frivolous teenager living
I,
life.
yeah. And I was writing notes. Like at one point I had, I don't know, maybe 100 pieces of paper with notes
Wow.
of tasks, and they were all over the floor. I mean, things like on TV, there's, Homeland, I think, is an example of a character where she has bipolar and she's a detective, but she's written thousands of pieces of notes. But it was sort of like that. So this experience for my family was awful. For me, was okay-ish. And then I had 3 really serious bouts of depression after that were very cyclical. And I was depressed to the point of can't move, couldn't even hold Alice. The only thing I could do was to lie down next to her on the ground and put my hand on her tummy. Like that was like the most I could do. And it was full of so much anxiety that went with it. So it wasn't just the low, it was the complete panic. It was so, again, like when I was going through that part, was so traumatic. But for my family, it was easier to cope with me. It was like they could kind of look after
And
me.
because
And
you're
so,
in one place as well,
yeah,
right?
I was in
Yeah.
one place, and I was just such a sad version of myself. And so it's hard when the experience you have is so different to those around you. But over that period of, say, 6 months, trying to just move on as a family and trying to, even for me, reconnecting with Alice, and the guilt of like, I wasn't there. And there was so many things going on that we ended up moving from Auckland down to Christchurch, but kind of just to get away from the house we were in and to start this fresh life. And so, yeah, there was a lot happening. And I think it really was only when we were able to have Henry that he was a healing part of it
Mm.
all. It was sort of like it was complete and we'd got through it. So, yeah, it was
Wow.
a journey.
And that, I mean, not that we're going to go into the full depths of postpartum or anything like that, but I actually haven't heard of the high. Like the low is what is predominantly talked about, the baby blues, between day 3 and 7, post birth, all of those things. Yeah, that is the majority of what is talked about are the signs of the lowness, and that there isn't a lot of factoring in that there could be the literally the polar opposite of being in that high, and that is also unhealthy and dysfunctional. And wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah. And I spoke to our antenatal class because actually, in our group of 10 women, there was me, and then there was another woman who'd had psychosis, which is obviously really. And I talked to our antenatal class and said, well, maybe there should be some more around what else to look for. And their response was, well, we don't want to scare people. That was
But
the
this
end
is the
of it.
reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is actually really, I mean, I'm going to go down another whole rabbit hole here, but we had a really challenging first year as well. Colic, reflux, like he didn't sleep, everything. And we were really blindsided too. But it's like there's so much preparation and emphasis on birth, not on life after birth.
Yeah.
Your birth is, you know, 4 to 20 hours. So
Yeah.
I know some women have way longer births. I mean, mine was 6 hours, but like, 4 to 20 hours. And then you've got the rest of your life with this child that you now know nothing what to do. You've never been a parent before. This is also to kind of connect this back to mental health. This is the challenge that we have, right? Like, we don't want to scare people. We don't want to put ideas in people's heads. We don't want to navigate conversations that we don't know how to deal with. But it's because we keep saying things like that, that these things keep being so problematic and
Yeah.
keep being brushed under the rug, and people aren't noticing signs that they need to look for because we're scared of scaring people. But the
Yeah.
reality of when these things show up is flippin' scary.
Oh, totally. And I think the other part is that it's not even about, educating people on what mania is or what psychosis is. It just comes down to having tools in your toolkit. So when I look at when I became unwell, we had none. We had like not a single tool that we could pull on, a lever, anything that we could even apply from what we've gone through in our careers. And so antenatal classes that go, okay, now we're going to talk half an hour about imposter syndrome because you're suddenly going to have no idea who you are and whether you can do anything. Or let's talk about the fact that your relationship is probably going to massively suffer because lack of sleep and everything. And you might even be on the verge of divorce. Shall we talk about that? Like, people would want to talk about that rather than let's spend 3 hours talking about how the baby comes out.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. So I totally agree about the
Yeah, and I mean, like, the baby coming out is natural, right? I
yeah.
mean, the body will know what to do, and if there are interventions needed, you've got your doctors around you. But yeah, like, your marriage almost ending up in divorce because, yeah, you don't have those tools or don't know how to navigate. I mean, and this is mental health to a T, right? Like, I think your situation was one of those extremes, right? Like, it's not happening to the everyday mum who's giving birth. However, you know, every single person will have a challenge with mental health at some point in their life, in
Yeah.
some way or in some form. And coming back to what you said around like having some tools, having some levers that we can pull is absolutely critical. And that's what I want to come to in this episode of navigating mental health as a leader. So, actually, just before we jump into that part, what was it like going back to work, especially being in the HR space where I also come from HR? The predominance of our job is caring for other people, caring for the workplace, the employees, the leadership team, all of those things. How was it stepping back into work after going through such a massive experience and moving cities, right?
I think probably the first thing that comes to mind is how much I questioned when I'd apply for a role or you'd fill out a form and it'd be like, do you have any medical conditions that could impact your ability to do this job? And it was like,
Do
well, I do
I?
got bipolar. Like, do I need to share it? And I remember just Googling, like, should I disclose it? And then I was thinking, do I talk to a lawyer about this? Like, that became such a huge thing in my mind. The second part was, what if they find out? Like, I still was so worried. I mean, and obviously we're talking, what, 8 years ago now. What if my future employer finds out that I've had this and I'm fired? And I'm like, I'm in HR. Like, I know realistically, like logically that that can't happen. But back then, I guess, even when I thought about my HR role before I had Alice, we never talked about mental health. Like, I can't remember that coming up in anything. And I do recall, even in performance situations and people saying, oh, I suffer from depression. Like, I remember back then, obviously pre going through anything, just going, oh, that's just so annoying. They've brought that up. So that was the first part. I ended up going into an HR role probably because of how I felt worried at the DHB, looking after women's and child health. So it was like, I was drawn to that because it was like, well, I think they would understand. And, I think I took a role that I could definitely do. It didn't challenge me necessarily, but I think that was probably a good thing.
Was
The
safer?
culture, safer. It was
Yeah.
safer. The culture was quite flexy. So that was definitely nerve wracking. But I think for me, my HR skills, it was always around talking and influencing, like just from a relationship building perspective. And so I felt like I hadn't lost that. Like, I had lost a lot of confidence, but I could still be me. And that was what I just needed to continue to do. So I think over time it became easier. And I think I started slightly mentioning it to people over time to test. And I definitely still got the vibe of like, oh, awkward situation, and just
And so when
yeah,
you applied for that role, you didn't disclose
no,
at that time? Yeah.
I didn't. And I guess in my mind too, it was, it doesn't impact my ability to do the job because I'm well, and that's me.
I mean, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because it's like, how are we defining impactability to do your job? I mean, I worked at a DHB in surgery, women's and children's. I was the HR advisor there too. I mean, we didn't work together, just
Yeah.
FYI. And I've been in a couple of medical incapacity processes where, again, that definition of medical condition impactability to do your job, but it's like, to what extent are we defining that? And when someone looks at a form like that that says, do you have a medical condition that could impact your ability to do your job? There's no way we can actually answer that question with all of the information, because it's, well, right now, no. Right now, my mental health is completely in check, but I don't know what's going to happen in 3 months' time. Could something happen in my personal life that could re-trigger something within me that may impact my ability to do my job? It's how much are we setting people up with questions like that to hide, to not disclose, to not be their whole self? This comes back to just such deeper conversations about authenticity, transparency, honesty, and how organizations actually set people up for that.
Yeah. And I think it should be rephrased to, is there any physical reason you can't carry out this work? As in, if you need to be running 10K a day, but you have whatever it is, like it's a very specific kind of, these are the tasks. Is there anything physical that would stop you actually being able to do that safely or without you being in lots of pain? Like it becomes an easier thing than saying from a mental health perspective, because technically every mental health condition should be able to be managed to some extent, or that you're just in control of that. Like I think it's a tricky question.
And it's also hard, right? Because we also don't work in an era where the majority of people are doing physical work. Like, yes, physical hours and physical computers and stuff like that impact, but being in a knowledge area, and now what they're saying, we're in a transformational area, the predominance of that is mental. Like
Yeah.
it is our mental capacity, it is our mental ability and our mental agility and all of those things. So, I mean, I think it's still an important question. I think it's the way that it's phrased and the way that it could be interpreted and the way that it's handled. Because at the moment, with just a blanket question on a form, there's too much interpretation that's left to the person to then decide, to what level is this going to impact me or not?
Yeah.
Like, how much is this going to disadvantage me? Because that's essentially what it's coming down to. It's like, how much could this potentially disadvantage me with how honest I am? I mean, that's a whole other, we need to have like a whole HR roundtable about that conversation.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
from a leader's point of view, when you did start talking about it, like, when did you openly start really stating that this was your experience, that you have a diagnosis of postpartum bipolar? Like, when that really came out, what happened from a leadership point of view? Like, with your leaders, what was that experience?
So I probably have quite an extreme story in that I was also working on KITE. So I was working and then just sort of growing this other baby. And it was Mental Health Awareness Week of that year. And I decided to send through my story to a staff journalist, like, as just to be like,
Real bold.
anyway, it was the front page story for the whole day on Stuff. And
Wow.
when I had sent this story through, like, this is definitely a learning, like, I hadn't told my husband. I just sent it because I was like, oh, it's Mental Health Awareness Week and maybe there'll be like this anonymous story. And I'd sent through a picture of our family. And so I didn't realize that it was
Hannah.
on Stuff, honestly, on Stuff. My husband rang me. He was like, what is this story? And our pictures on here. And like, it was a very sort of average move on my part. So I rang the journalist and was like, please, 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 can you take this family photo down? And so she was like, oh, yep, of course. And so I found like an image of Unsplash or something of like, honestly, it was, anyway. So I sent this and was like, okay, I need to deal with this. And I walked in to work and it's a really big open plan office, and all I can see is my
Stuff.
face on screens,
Oh
like
my
people
gosh.
reading it. Like it was just, I don't know, it sounds like a movie. Like it's just ridiculous. But
And
anyway,
you're walking down, and it's like slow motion movie montage, like music playing, and you're like,
uh,
I'm walking to my boss's office. Like, what do I do?
just so extreme. So that was how I told everyone. Like
Oh
at the
my
same
gosh, this is
time
not
as,
what I expected.
and it was just ridiculous because at that point, there was editors' picks, and I just kept going on. I'd be like, oh, it's still there. Like I was like, please let there be something else go on in the world. Anyway, and the hard thing was obviously there's like comments and trolls and people saying horrible things, which I wasn't prepared for either. And yeah, my boss obviously had read it, and she was she was lovely. She was just like, wow, I didn't realize, and I can totally understand why you haven't shared it, and this is quite a big deal, isn't it? And that was that. So in a way, it's kind of like it got done. It was done all like all at once. Even like people I went to school with, just it was very out there. And because no one had really, especially back then, like postpartum bipolar was just, no one even knew it. So I suppose it just was such a interesting story for people.
What is this? I've never heard of this before, especially the parents. I mean, especially the
Yeah.
mums would have really resonated with that.
Yeah.
And I guess also, I mean, coming back to when you initially shared about your story, a lot of people may not have seen you during that time, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
the people that would have predominantly known you, you said you moved down to Christchurch from Auckland. So that's also the other thing about mental health, right? Like, how much are people really seeing? And then when stuff does start coming out, they're like, I didn't know. I never would have thought, wow, I never would have seen that on you. And that's also
Yeah.
something else we need to be a little bit careful about too, right?
Yeah, and I think, like, I'd been to a couple of weddings, like, quite close after Alice, well, within sort of a year of Alice being born, and, like, I look at those photos and I know exactly what was going on the inside, but no one there would
Mm.
have, and everyone starts drinking, and so there was a few people even that I'd seen at these weddings who were like, "Wow, I didn't know." And my response is always like, "It's like, you shouldn't, it's okay." Like, you
I'm not guilting you into not,
yeah, like I did make the choice not to share. And I think even when we say now, you always ask people if they're okay, and it's okay to not be okay. But also, it is up to that person to share. And if they don't share, there's nothing you can do. Like you can't help, or you can't either, unless that person is willing to go, I need help. So there's definitely that. I think a lot of friends who weren't aware felt really guilty and wanted to get in touch and tell me how sorry they were, and like that's obviously not overly helpful either because
like,
it
this
was
is
sort of
actually
like
isn't about you.
needing to make you feel better. But so yeah, there's just a lot of aspects to all of that, really.
I mean, that comes down to a whole of empathy dumping, isn't it? I know you're trying to give me empathy, but you're seeking it in return. And this makes this really muddled in terms of
Yeah.
what this conversation really is about. Okay, so I really want to make this practical for people as well. But one of the biggest things, I guess, before we jump into some practicals for leaders or really just any person, because no matter if you're in a position of leadership, you still have an aspect of leadership with people around you. But before we jump into that, you spoke a bit to this already when the news article came out, trolls, right? Horrible
Mhm.
comments, horrible people. And I think this is one of the most challenging things about Gen Z who are coming up. They're the first generation that only knows social media, that only knows everything is linked to technology, and the vastness of what that means in terms of less privacy, more trolling, cancellation, all of those things that come to having a voice. Now, how did you manage that, especially when you launched KITE? Part of launching KITE was
Yeah.
about you and your story and continuously sharing that to
Yeah.
promote what KITE is. How did you navigate being a public voice, and especially around something as challenging as mental health?
Yeah. So when that article came out, I remember just being so derailed by these troll comments, like for days. Like I just couldn't unsee them. And I kept trying to picture who it was. Like, who are they? Do they have kids? Are they on their own? And I think it was just a really good learning for me that was just so unhealthy. Like you can go down the worst rabbit hole. And what I started to do was just, and this is what I do with every part of my life now, is just like, what am I trying to achieve? What is the end goal? And what is the bigger vision, and for me, I realized that to be a voice in the mental health world meant that there would be negatives, and I really accepted. It's like you can't get to where you want to be and help people truly, still being so worried about who might say what and where. I don't really know what it was. It was a mixture of all of those things, really. But it was like, I always talk about, particularly with KITE, like when I thought about what I was trying to do, I would picture a mum just come out of the shower with no towel, just sitting on the bathroom floor and crying because she was so overwhelmed. And all I did was just picture her all the time. And it was like, when I pictured her, nobody could say anything to me that would affect me, because I'd be like, I've got her, like, this is my goal. So you could say whatever you like to me, it's not going to affect that. And I won't let it, because she needs me and all those other people need me. And that's just been how I approach everything. And it just means that anybody who says anything, whether it's a comment or the vibe you get from someone when they think you're oversharing, it's like they're so unimportant. And I think that's a hard thing for teenagers on social media, because I think that at that age, you don't have that
Well,
vision.
you're
And
impressionable, right? Like you're still trying to belong.
yeah, so it's like that purpose. If you've got a purpose, you can do anything. I mean, that's really, I think, where that comes to. It's kind of like you become quite tunnel visioned in terms of what's helping that cause.
I really love what you said, because you made it not about you, right? Like you made it about someone else, the one person that needed your message that day or needed KITE to be live so that they could access it. And this is actually a beautiful lead into us talking about practicality, because this is such an important point for leaders. Because one of the things that I see a lot when I coach leaders one-on-one or in groups, especially around difficult conversations, because you would absolutely plug this into a difficult conversation. You're noticing some things are shifting with someone in your team and you need to address it or talk about it, is putting that practice in place of, the reason why we make difficult conversations so difficult is because we're constantly thinking about what they're going to think about us, right? Like, what are they going to think about us? How are they going to react to me? And it becomes very ego, right? It's very self-absorbed of like, me, how I feel, how I feel. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. When we step into a position of leadership, though, we need to shift that focus on the necessity of having these conversations because of the impact of the person that we're thinking about or that it involves. And it is about like transferring that self to other, right? I need to have this challenging, difficult, uncomfortable conversation because I know that it's going to be helpful for how we move forward together. Instead of thinking about how I necessarily feel about it, is what is the power that is this going to have for this relationship or for this person? And that helps to create separation of the worry of what are they going to think about me and all of that stuff. I think that that's so critical because, as you say, like you had it, you were spot on. Like when we have purpose, we have something to focus on other than the naysayers, right? Because the people who feel attacked, who are victimizing, who are trolling and all of those things, they are the people who probably need it the most, but
Yeah.
are not willing to be helped or not willing to see that. And like you said earlier on in the episode, for people to be helped, they also need to be willing to be helped. Both of those things need to be true. Both of those things need to be present. So I really love that you shared that, because I think it's so important for leaders to think about that as well, to move away from self and how can I think about my team and the people who I lead.
And I think the thing is, it's a privilege to be in a position to help or to be an advocate or to be a leader. That's a privilege that you can use your skills and everything to help that person or grow that person, whatever it is. And I think that gets lost a lot of the time, because the moment that there's a negative experience or someone says something that you don't like you say, the ego kicks in and it becomes all about how awful you feel and how they've made you feel. It's like you have to be really strong to kind of stop that ego taking over. It's like having that awareness to go, I know what's going to happen right now. My ego is going to start feeling really bad, and you've hurt my feelings, and you've got to kind of go, like, unhelpful. Like, it's okay that you're there. You don't fight it off. It's just like accepting that that's there. It's always going to be there. We all have it. But if you just then go, okay, what are we trying to achieve? Often in a workplace, if it's a performance conversation or if it's a team discussion, you're all there and you're all being paid to do a job. And whatever that job is, it's like we're trying to grow the company, we're trying to get more customers, like whatever that is, there is a job you're there for, and you all have to do your part to get there. And we're not at high school and we're not sitting around as a group of friends. We're in a workplace. Those conversations have to happen. And I think that part, like from what I've experienced, is as soon as you can bring that into that sort of ring fence, the way you talk about mental health then fits in really nicely with that, because we're all on the same mission. We're all on the same boat. Someone's man down or someone's spiraling out of control over here, but the goal is we're all in this boat together and we do our bit, and that feels more practical that way.
Yeah, you can tie it back to, well, there is a common goal that is inherently there. So, what are we doing as a connected team to help everyone get there? And sometimes that means holding space for someone who can't be at the level as everyone else right now because of something they might be going through. But again, like if we focus on that, it creates a third point. And I learned about this in the coaching habit. Creating a third point in a conversation can be really powerful because it can create a sense of distance from the selves to the third point to go, actually, this is what we can talk to, which can be really powerful, especially within mental health conversations, because then it doesn't become about you. It can be about the thing that we're talking about. And then how do we work to resolve that thing rather than it being something that's inherently, even though it is personal, and I'm not trying to create a disconnection with it, it can just sometimes help with the conversation to create that third point in. But with that, let's jump into some practicals. As a previous HR professional, having gone through what you've gone through, re-entered the workforce, had your story come out, navigating, talking so openly about mental health in the workplace, publicly on LinkedIn, building your own company. What are some of the key things that leaders need to pay attention to or look out for when it comes to mental health for their people? But again, like as I said, not only people leaders, but even just everyone. Like, what are the things that we can look out for to maybe minimize the heaviness, I guess, of navigating mental health?
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of looking out for signs of somebody maybe struggling, it comes down to really taking note of people's behaviors as leaders. Often and I'm guilty of this, but often what people do is you become so busy and there's so much going on that you really don't take note of the world around you. It's like going for a walk in the forest and just looking at the path and not even noticing trees and birds. It's such an important part where you should take note of things like what time people walk in. Are they listening to music when they walk in? Just really noticing. And then when you notice those things not happening or there being a change, you can be alerted to, okay, Tash is not feeling great, I don't think, because maybe she's just wearing black all the time or whatever it is.
She hasn't left her desk for lunch. Normally she always sits in the lunchroom, like just some of those little things.
Yeah, or she normally reads a book, but I haven't seen her reading for weeks. So there's those parts which I think all of us can just do a better job of just actually looking and actually noticing, and using nature as actually quite a good way to look at it. Like, go for a walk and start noticing things that you've never noticed before. Like, have you noticed that lamppost? What do you think of that road marking? And then once you do that, you come back in the workplace and you kind of like, I'm looking at different things now. And I think that's really powerful. And I think the other thing that's really important is the fact that not everything works for everyone. So there's a lot of, right, we're all going to do yoga. Everyone's going to do yoga and it's going to be amazing. And actually you look around and go, maybe 1 in 10 people would find yoga great. The second person would find this. And so really just actually understanding what makes people happy and what brightens someone's day. And is it food? Is it that person just loves food and that having a really yummy sandwich brought in? I don't know. It's actually starting to paint a picture of that we're all unique. And I think that goes a long way for leaders and just anyone in a team.
Love those two. And I actually I recorded another guest interview this morning. And we were talking about culture fixing, and this just plays such a big part in that, really getting to know your people, getting to know who they are, what they like, what they don't like, is inherently part of the culture that you are breeding within your team and within your organizations. But I really loved what you talked about around noticing and observing. I agree. Everyone just falls into this busyness of emails and work and tasks and meetings and, whatever. And we fail to notice things that are just in our face, like that are very obvious, and probably a little bit more challenging now that we are more of a hybrid workplace. But again, you can still do it. Like when you do jump on a Zoom, when you do jump on a video call, paying attention to like tiny little picks. Are they taking longer to answer things? Do they look different to how they would normally look? And it's just, those little things are such huge, huge signs of not even that something's wrong, just that something's shifted. And if you are a leader who regularly catches up with your team, has meaningful one-on-ones, not just whip meetings, these are where you have those conversations like, hey, over the last week, I really noticed this, or I've observed this has shifted. Is there anything going on? Like, do you need to talk about anything? And that's a courageous conversation because it's vulnerable, it's uncomfortable. You don't know how that person's going to react. However, we have to be willing to open up moments to have those conversations, because if we don't open up those moments, we don't give people the opportunity to share if they want to share. And this comes back to your earlier point, like they need to be willing to share. Like if someone goes, no, I'm fine, there's only so much you can do, because if you start prying and pushing, that can only create more problems. But it is your job to create open moments where people can lean into that conversation if they are ready to. And I would say the third practical thing there is be the example of what it means to navigate mental health. I think as leaders, one of the misconceptions is having to have it all together, needing to know it all, having all the answers, being perfect, nothing phases you. You can be really overwhelmed, you can be busy, you can be stressed, but still high functioning. All those things are very unhealthy. Being able to be a leader and say, hey team, like I feel really overwhelmed right now. I'm just struggling a little bit. I'm still here for you, but just know that I might not be on top of my game. These are the things that I'm doing. I just want to let you know. You don't have to go, you don't have to floodlight, you don't have to throw everything out on the table and let them know everything that's going on. But if you can create an open moment, it then shows everyone else in your team, wow, they just told us they were overwhelmed. I never thought that they could feel that way. Maybe I can share that I feel a little bit overwhelmed.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things I love, which is having a way, and my daughter's class, they actually do this, she's 11, and on a board, have a quad or however many in the grid and colours. So when you just come in the morning, there's just different colours for different moods, or really tired, or feeling overwhelmed, or had a big fight with my partner, whatever it is. And you come in, you pop your thing on, no judgment, and everyone can just see the grid and be like,
it's like a mood board. I love it.
Yeah. Have a problem over here because everyone's over in this bit, which I think is really lovely. And the other thing that I've always tried to encourage is when you say, how are you and how are you feeling? Most people find it really, really hard to find the right word. But if you can link it to a color or even just a number, like just out of 10, so like, how are you? Oh, 6. How are you? 4. And you're like, and there's like, it just takes away that feeling of like, how do you put into words? And because you always feel that, if someone says to you, how are you? And if you say, actually, I'm really feeling anxious, there's too much happening there, because what if that other person doesn't know what to say? Whereas if you say, I'm a 2, you go, oh, that's no good. And
what can we do? Like, what do you need?
And it doesn't have to be linked to something like, I feel anxious or I feel scared, because that's too descriptive sometimes. Being a 2 could mean lots of things, and really it just does mean that you're a 2. It's like pain. It's, a 10 or a 5. Like, it doesn't matter whether that pain is in your head or your leg. It's pain. So you've got to do something about it. I find, especially with often men who find that, when we were working in a startup incubator, everyone is like, yeah, we're nailing it, everything's great. And so I started being like either colors or numbers, and then people would be like 3, because they could.
Everyone's not great.
Yeah. You could just say a number. So yeah.
But also, like, I love the numbers as well, because sometimes people don't actually know what they're like. They can't act, like they themselves can't name it. So to try and name it for you so that you can better understand it, like that's also really challenging. And that's like why I love the emotional culture deck, because it helps to create emotion labels that we can be like, oh, I do actually feel a little bit alienated right now. And that's not a word that you would predominantly use, like, I feel alienated. But when you see the word, you're like, oh my God, that's exactly what I feel like. And so, yeah, like using almost like going back to childlike things, like, because that's how you would start those conversations with your children. You would start progressively getting into emotion words and building their emotional vocabulary. But yeah, using those things to, again, create a third point, right? Because it creates a third point to be like the blue or the green or the 2 or the 4. And as soon as you acknowledge it or name it, it just creates that distance as well. Like it almost creates a little bit of that dissipation, which I really love. I really love those two. And actually, just the fifth one that I want to throw in there, something that I recommend a lot of my leaders do is with their teams, is actually have the conversation with the team of like, what are your signals when something is off? So what are your signals when you're starting to go down that overwhelm burnout road? What are some of the signals that we as a team can learn so that we as a team can look for? So for me, like, I know that I'm getting really stressed when I start becoming really irritable and I become really short. Like, I don't have a lot of patience and a lot of capacity, like for conversation or small talk or things like that. That's when I start to realize I'm like, oh, like there's something a bit amiss here and I need to pay attention. And I find that's really powerful because sometimes, especially when we're navigating mental health, sometimes we can't see what's actually happening. We can't notice it because we're so in it, right? Or we're just trying to hide it or whatever it might be. We're just trying to be a high functioning person while we've got stress and anxiety or what it might be. And so if we can share some of those signals with the people around us, especially the people we spend the most time with. And if you go into an office, that is the majority of time that you're spending with people. And if they know some of those signals, that can be really, really helpful to be, hey, I'm noticing this signal coming up. Is everything okay? When was the last time you just took some time off? Or have you given yourself some space? Or is there anything I can do? Is there a lot going on that I can help you with? You're spending so much time with your team, like leverage them, use them. And the more that we bring these things into conversations, the more people are willing to have those conversations.
Oh, totally. And it's like a sports team. Like you wouldn't find a sports team not knowing each of the players, and when you're having a hard day or when you don't know the game plan. Like it's no different. But I think that we get very caught up in, like you say, the busyness and the tasks we need to do, that the people become secondary. But actually they're the first, and then you can start doing your tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Oh, that's amazing. So, just to recap some of those practical things, number one was notice, so observe, pay attention to the people around you. Is anything shifting and changing? Number two was realize that they're unique, right? So, like, find out the things that they love, find out the things that bring them joy and excitement. So, not plastering a one well-being strategy fits for everyone. Number three is creating open moments. So sharing and like being willing to have those conversations with your people. So if you are noticing something shifting, creating those open moments and being willing to share yourself. So creating that vulnerability of you not being perfect and that you having some of those challenges. And then, using a different way of sharing feelings. So whether that's a color or a number, just bringing that into the conversation. So getting a sense of what is the collective feel and then how can we respond to that as a team. So I really love those. Amazing. So I know that we're coming to the end of our episode. So one thing I did want you to do was just to share about the KITE program. So you've mentioned it a couple of times. So just share what the KITE program is and what organizations can get from it.
The KITE program is an app-based program, which is based on tiny microbites. And it came from the idea that I had that if I could help mums, the most amazing thing would be if I could write a tiny note each day and put it in her letterbox. And all she had to do was just get to the letterbox, maybe in her dressing gown, and open it up. And it wouldn't just be something kind of like a quote or theory about something. It was an actual practical step that she could do then. And so obviously I couldn't do that with letterboxes. So KITE is a app version of that. So technically you move through, there's different kites, which are kind of modules, and you can only do one a day. So you literally just get this one activity and you reflect and you do it. And then the next day you do your one activity. And so there's no overwhelm and you can do it at your own pace. And so obviously it started off for mums, and that was topics that were very kind of personal to mums and around relationships and all sorts of things. Some of them really fun things. And then we branched into having versions for workplaces where organisations can actually tailor the kites and the activities to their people. And we have an eating disorders version called Love Your Kite, which is, wonderful. And again, it's just really thinking about that person who's opening up that activity that day and who they are and where they might be sitting. And it's kind of all those things sort of brought into the experience, really.
Oh, I love that. And I really love that it's one a day. So people don't feel the pressure of having to look through them all and be like, oh, how many can I get done? And that kind of gamifying type thing, which is great.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love that. And that it can be done within 5 minutes, which, as we know, attention spans getting ever so much smaller. So the smaller and more practical it can be, the more powerful. So I love that. And if you are interested in knowing more about the KITE program, you can find the link in the show notes as well. So if you want to find out about that for your organization potentially, then definitely check that out and reach out to Hannah as well. So just to finish up, 3 lightning questions that I ask all of my guests. What is the best advice you ever received that's helped you be a great leader?
I think, it's actually since I was unwell, but it's a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And so it's just, I think that covers so many things, whether you're looking at a project or whether you're looking at something personal you're going through. It's probably very linked to KITE, but it's like just one tiny step a day. Like it's just you're making progress, even if you don't think you are. So I think about that a lot.
Oh, I love that one. What is one thing that helps you feel courageous to do scary things?
Just thinking about the purpose. Like I honestly feel like probably I've got to the point now where I feel like I could do anything because I know why I'm doing it. And whether it's thinking about that mum on the bathroom floor, or whether it's thinking about our work now with Contented in terms of just inspiring innovation and girls in tech and all of these things. So I think that it's just keeping that really like at the forefront of my mind always, of the why.
Yeah, I love that. And last one, what is one boundary that you uphold that supports you to be your best?
So I am very good now at just saying no to events or things that I just don't want to go to. And if I get to sort of a few hours before the event or whatever it is, like I still give myself the freedom to be like, I don't want to go. Like, I'm just going to put my pajamas on now. So I don't do what I used to do, which was just say yes all the time and go to everything and feel horrible. Like, that's a very strict boundary. And I tell my friends and I tell people that I have that I might just not come. Rude, but
You have the right to change your mind, right? And as women in particular, we make plans when we're ovulating, and then the plan comes around when we're menstruating, and we're like, oh no, energy is completely different at this time of the month. And I think if more women paid attention to that, I feel like we would be different realms of power. That is for sure.
Or
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hannah. This was just fabulous. And thank you for being so open and courageous and vulnerable and sharing your story with us. I know that a lot of people will really take away so much from it and benefit from it. Where can people connect with you? Where are you most active?
best place is LinkedIn. I'm there a lot. So Hannah Hardy Jones. And then, as you say, if you want to know more about KITE, is our website, or Contented is my new business within
Yeah.
AI.
And maybe I'll bring you back on for a whole conversation around that, especially leaders navigating AI as well. So thank you again so much. This has been amazing. We would love to hear what you think about the episode. So just let us know. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lead with Less, the podcast for people leaders. I hope what you've heard today has helped you on your people leadership journey. Remember, it's all a practice and you get better each day. If you enjoyed this episode and the show, please subscribe and take a moment to leave a review on iTunes, or you can leave a review on Spotify's Q&A polls under each episode. And if you know anyone who could benefit from listening to the show, then please do share this with them and help me reach as many people leaders as possible.
Thank you.